Hey guys, tonight, we slip beneath heavy velvet drapes into the dim gaslit parlors of the 19th century, where anxiety hangs as thick as the fog outside and sleeplessness isn't just a nuisance, it's a full-blown crisis. You're not just tossing and turning tonight. You're joining a Victorian society obsessed, absolutely consumed with the terrifying idea that they might never sleep again. Fair warning, you probably won't survive this world unless you enjoy being simultaneously underdressed and over-medicated while your doctor debates whether your brain is simply too modern for its own good. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment with your location and local time. I love seeing where everyone's tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The year is 1879. You pull your wool cloak tighter as you stroll through London's fog-drenched streets. The gas lamps flicker. Carriages clatter along cobblestones. But as you pass by rows of elegant townhouses, something strange lurks behind their drawn curtains, wide open eyes, pacing footsteps, and endless cups of tea. Welcome to the Victorian age of insomnia. You might think sleeplessness is a thoroughly modern problem, too many screens, too much caffeine. But here, in the late 19th century, a different kind of anxiety is gnawing at the minds of the middle and upper classes. And unlike today's sleepy masses, these folks blame their racing thoughts not on TikTok, but on progress itself. Historians still argue whether the Victorian insomnia epidemic was truly worse than in earlier eras, or if it simply became more visible thanks to the rise of print media and anxious physicians ready to label every restless night as a symptom of society's decline. Either way, people believed they were under siege. You pause at a bookstore window. The display features pamphlets with titles like Sleepless Nights and Their Cure and The Tyranny of Wakefulness. Authors warn of sleeplessness leading to nervous collapse, moral decay, even death. You shudder a little, dramatic much, but for Victorians, sleep wasn't just about feeling rested. It was about sanity, virtue, and survival. Inside those elegant drawing rooms, men and women sit by oil lamps, fretting. Their nerves are overstimulated, their thoughts spinning like gears in the newly built factories. Physicians whisper of brain fever and nervous prostration. Doctors like George Beard, soon to be famous, argue that modern life itself, electric telegraphs, fast trains, city noise. Constant stimulation has made the mind fragile, easily exhausted. Neurasthenia, they call it nervous exhaustion. You wander past a cafe where two well-dressed gentlemen argue quietly. One blames the railroads, the speed, the constant clatter. The other swears it's the new electric lights ruining natural sleep rhythms. Both agree life is simply too fast for the human brain. Of course, they aren't entirely wrong. Industrialization has upended daily life. For the first time, people can work late into the night under gas or electric light. Letters that once took weeks now arrive within days, even hours, by train and telegraph. The endless hum of factories churns through the night. Your ancestors simply went to bed when the sun set. You lie awake wondering if your heart is racing or if you've simply read too much Dickens before bed. The wealthy with their extra leisure time may be the worst off. Without physical labor to exhaust them, their minds stew over business deals, social obligations, and the pressure to maintain their standing. Victorian etiquette leaves little room for rest. You must always present calm grace and perfect health, all while silently panicking about your inability to fall asleep. As you pass another window, you glimpse a woman reclined on a fainting couch, a damp cloth over her forehead. She's suffering from female hysteria, which conveniently shares many symptoms with insomnia. Physicians prescribe rest cures, bland diets, or worse, but more on that later. You continue on, turning onto a quieter residential street. The houses here are grander, the windows darker. But even in these stately homes, insomnia rules. Upper-class Victorians install specialized sleep chambers. Thick curtains block light-padded doors, muffle noise clocks, or remove to prevent obsessive time-checking. Some even commission soundproof bedrooms with extra thick walls, a luxury for the most anxious elite. You wonder briefly if they might have benefited from a simple pair of earplugs and a white noise machine. But alas, they were too busy inventing far stranger solutions. As you stroll past a doctor's office, you see patients arriving pale, anxious, clutching letters from friends recommending this physician's special nerve tonic. The doctor peers over his spectacles, ready to diagnose each one as another victim of modern life's relentless pace. And yet, beneath all this clinical language, one truth remains: these people are scared. Scared of losing control. Scared that sleeplessness might shatter their carefully constructed worlds. Victorian culture teaches that self-mastery is everything. If you can't sleep, perhaps you're weak. Perhaps you've lost control of your nerves. Perhaps your moral fiber is fraying. No pressure, right? You can't help but chuckle, realizing that while the vocabulary has changed, the fear feels eerily familiar. Who among us hasn't stared at the ceiling at 3 a.m., mentally listing every failure since childhood while promising, tomorrow, I'll fix it all? As the clock tower chimes softly in the distance, you pull your cloak tighter again. The night deepens. But in homes across the city, countless eyes remain open, flickering anxious, searching desperately for sleep that refuses to come. And this, my friend, is only the beginning of your long, sleepless walk through the Victorian night. The city awakens as you continue your quiet wandering. But not everyone greets the morning refreshed. You see it in the tired faces of Londoners, shuffling down narrow streets, pale under their top hats and bonnets, their eyes hollowed by yet another restless night. You've entered an era where even progress itself seems determined to rob people of sleep. As you walk toward the industrial districts, the sky glows faintly with coal smoke rising from countless chimneys. The factories are already humming gears, clanking steam, hissing workers pouring in like ants into a hive. The rhythmic pounding of machines echoes through your ribs. This is the sound of industrialization, and it's deafening. For centuries, people lived by the sun and moon. Work ended with daylight. Sleep came when darkness settled in. But not anymore. With the invention of gaslight and later electric lighting, the boundaries between night and day begin to blur. Historians still argue whether artificial lighting alone caused the Victorian sleep crisis or whether it was simply the most obvious villain in a world spinning faster. But standing here under the glow of an early gas lamp, as men in soot-streaked coats marched to work before dawn, you suspect it played a powerful role. The noise never stops now. Railways thunder day and night, their schedules indifferent to the body's natural rhythms. Steamships arrive at all hours, telegraphs deliver urgent messages at midnight, and newspapers report global events within hours instead of weeks. Information travels faster than ever, and with it comes a rising sense of restlessness. Even the wealthier classes, tucked safely away from factory floors, feel the pressure. Stock markets move faster. Global empires expand rapidly. Every ambitious merchant banker and investor finds himself lying awake at night, heart-pounding thoughts racing. You overhear a pair of merchants at a cafe table arguing over futures contracts in India. They sip their heavily sugared coffee, eyes twitching from exhaustion. Too much at stake, one mutters. Can't stop thinking, can't sleep, and they aren't alone. Medical journals fill with letters from anxious patients describing heart palpitations, dizziness, fatigue, and always insomnia. Doctors begin warning of overwork of the brain, suggesting that the nervous system itself might be wearing out like an overused telegraph wire. Some even warn that city living may literally poison the air, filling lungs with soot and chemicals that corrupt the body's delicate balance. Others speculate that vibrations from trains might jostle internal organs, unsettling digestion, and naturally disturbing sleep. Victorian physicians are nothing if not creative. You pass by a newsboy shouting headlines about another transatlantic cable being laid, more instant messages connecting continents. Faster communication? Faster news, faster anxiety. And while this pace of life is exhilarating for some, it's clearly overwhelming for many. Even recreation feels frantic. You glance through the tall glass windows of a music hall, where late-night performances rage on well past midnight. Bright lights, energetic songs, roaring laughter, the party never truly ends. And when it does, the sleepless lie awake in the silence afterward, their ears still ringing. Of course, none of this would be complete without the Victorian fascination with moralizing their sleeplessness. For many, insomnia becomes a mark of status, a problem for the thinking classes, the intellectuals, the progress drivers. The working poor may collapse into bed from exhaustion, but for the refined mind, sleep becomes elusive precisely because one is so advanced, so intellectually engaged, so modern. Historians still debate whether this self-congratulatory framing was a defense mechanism or a genuine belief, likely both. After all, it's far more flattering to say you suffer insomnia because of your brilliant mind than because you're simply overwhelmed. You pause at the entrance of a grand hotel. Inside, gentlemen in tailored suits whisper about restlessness of the age as they sip their warm milk, one of many supposed sleep aids. A pamphlet on the counter reads, "The Modern Man's Burden Rest and the New Century." You can't help but smile at the irony. They built a world that never sleeps, and now they can't either. The working classes, meanwhile, face their own brand of sleeplessness. Cramped housing, irregular shifts, night work in gaslit factories, and relentless noise keep many awake. Children cry in overcrowded tenements, while trains rumble nearby. Unlike the wealthy, their exhaustion rarely earns them sympathetic doctors or expensive remedies. Instead, they turn to cheaper fixes, strong tea, cheap gin, patent tonics, sold from brightly colored street carts, promising restful slumber for pennies. Spoiler alert, many of these tonics contain alcohol, opium, or both. But we'll get to that carnival of questionable medicine very soon. You walk further into the city as the bells of St. Paul's begin to toll the hour. The streets bustle now, but underneath the clatter of wheels and the calls of merchants, you hear something else. A humming undercurrent of anxiety. Everyone is moving, working, striving. But no one seems rested. The city itself feels like an enormous insomniac, pacing endlessly through the night and into the next day. And as the Victorian world races ahead, so too does the hunt for cures, strange, elaborate, and sometimes outright dangerous, to recapture that ever-elusive sleep. You keep walking as the early light warms the city's stone facades. But behind the glitter of progress, the real trouble is brewing inside Victorian doctors' offices. Here, insomnia is being given a name, a new disease for a new century. They call it neurasthenia. You peer through the window of a fashionable consulting room. A respectable gentleman sits rigid in a leather chair, explaining his troubles to a physician in a long black coat. His hands tremble slightly as he describes racing thoughts, heart palpitations, dizziness, and of course, nights spent wide awake. The doctor listens gravely, nodding. "Your nerves, sir, are exhausted." Historians still argue whether neurasthenia was a legitimate medical condition or a convenient umbrella term for every modern discomfort Victorians couldn't explain. But one thing is certain, it became the diagnosis of the age. The physician scribbles a prescription, perhaps a nerve tonic, a rest cure or advice to withdraw from all activity for months. His patient leaves both relieved and a little ashamed, clutching his paper like a fragile ticket back to sanity. The theory behind neurasthenia is deceptively simple. The nervous system, like any machine, can be overworked. Victorians believed that the constant stimuli of modern life, telegrams, railroads, business deals, social obligations, drained vital energy from the body's fragile internal battery. And once that battery ran low, sleep became one of the first casualties. You stroll past another medical office, where Dr. George Beard's name is painted in elegant gold letters on the window. Beard will soon become one of the most famous proponents of neurasthenia. He argues that American and British society, with its dizzying technological advances, is creating an entirely new category of patient, the modern nervous wreck. The list of symptoms Beard and his followers assemble could apply to almost anyone: fatigue, irritability, poor concentration, digestive troubles, muscle aches, anxiety. And of course, insomnia. Convenient, isn't it? If you're tired, wired, or overwhelmed, you probably have neurasthenia, and business is booming. The wealthier classes especially flock to this diagnosis. It allows them to explain their sleeplessness in a way that preserves dignity. After all, they're not weak or lazy. They're simply too refined, too sensitive for this harsh, fast-paced modern world. Their highly developed minds have made them vulnerable. It's practically a badge of intellectual honor. Of course, as you slip past a bookshop display, you spot pamphlets debating this very point. One headline shouts, "Is neurasthenia a disease of the weak or the brilliant?" Scholars still debate whether this was Victorian self-flattery or an early form of mental health awareness wrapped in grandiose language. Likely both. Women, too, are frequently diagnosed, though their version often wears a different label: hysteria. Female patients complaining of insomnia, anxiety, or exhaustion are often ushered toward rest cures, quiet retreats, and strict bed rest. Their nerves, doctors argue, are simply not suited for the stresses of modern life. You pause by the window of a women's sanatorium, where an elegantly dressed woman lies stiffly in bed, reading by lamplight. The curtains are heavy, the room perfectly silent. This is the prescribed rest cure: total isolation, minimal stimulation, and as little mental or physical activity as possible. Some women endure months of this enforced idleness. Historians still argue whether these rest cures helped or harmed. For some, they provided a much-needed break from constant social demands. For others, the enforced idleness worsened anxiety and deepened depression, making insomnia even more entrenched. The more you listen, the more you notice how much of Victorian medicine fixates on moral judgments disguised as science. Sleep isn't just a bodily function, it's a reflection of character. Restless, anxious. Perhaps your ambition exceeds your capacity. Perhaps your virtue is slipping. Perhaps your fragile nerves betray a deeper flaw. You cross paths with a middle-aged man pacing outside his townhouse, chain-smoking under the moon. His sleeplessness is obvious, his nerves frayed. But admitting vulnerability would be social suicide. So he mutters quietly to himself, hiding his crisis behind a polite smile by day and sleepless terror by night. In many ways, neurasthenia offers these people a lifeline, a diagnosis that says, "You're not failing. You're simply sensitive." But it also traps them in a cycle of endless treatments, half-explanations, and dubious remedies. You pass a vendor selling popular self-help guides, Sleep and the Brain, Mastering One's Nerves, The Art of Repose. Each promises to cure insomnia through disciplined diet and moral fortitude. The titles are as comforting as they are ambitious. Yet beneath it all, one truth remains: no matter how much they intellectualize it, these people are tired. Desperately, hopelessly tired. As you continue down the cobblestone street, the gas lamps flickering in the damp fog, you can almost feel the collective hum of thousands of sleepless Victorians lying in their meticulously darkened bedrooms, waiting for their nerves to quiet, for their racing thoughts to slow for the sleep that refuses to come. And soon you'll see how far they're willing to go, and how strange their methods become to chase that elusive rest. The deeper you wander into this sleepless Victorian night, the more you realize for many insomnia isn't just a personal health issue, it's a full-blown moral crisis. In drawing rooms across London, you glimpse genteel figures draped in embroidered shawls, sipping chamomile tea, as they confide their nighttime torment in hushed voices. For the upper classes, sleep has become yet another arena in which virtue, discipline, and social standing are constantly measured. A butler opens the door to one grand townhouse, and you're ushered into a parlor filled with plush chairs, heavy drapes, and the soft glow of oil lamps. Around you, a small gathering of aristocrats, mostly women, but a few men as well, exchange anxious whispers about their insomnia. I was awake half the night. One lady sighs dramatically, her fan fluttering like nervous wings. Counting breaths until dawn. You must resist coffee, dear, another advises. And strong emotions after dinner. Dr. Burroughs says even mild excitement may delay the repose. Victorian culture elevates sleep into a kind of moral battlefield. If you sleep well, you're virtuous, balanced, composed, pure of mind. If you don't, well, that suggests inner weakness, indulgence, or even spiritual failing. You haven't mastered your passions. You've let your thoughts run riot. Historians still debate whether this moral obsession with sleep reflected genuine concern for health or was just another way for elites to police behavior, especially among women. Probably both. Either way, the pressure to sleep properly creates its own special kind of insomnia spiral. You watch as a gentleman recounts his physician's advice: I must avoid reading novels before bed. The imagination excites the nerves. Only scripture or perhaps botanical manuals. You quietly suppress a chuckle. If only their physicians had warned them against reading pamphlets about insomnia, which seem far more likely to keep the mind racing. At the core of this moral panic is an obsession with self-control. The Victorians believed the body, and especially the mind, should obey reason. Uncontrolled thoughts are dangerous. Passion is dangerous. Even dreams make them uncomfortable. Lucid dreaming, spontaneous nightmares, these are unsettling to a culture that values calm order. Sleepwalking in particular horrifies Victorian households. A young debutante caught wandering the halls at night is not merely seen as peculiar. Her very reputation could be threatened. Is she fragile? Is she disturbed? Or worse, is her morality slipping? You overhear whispers about a neighbor's daughter. She wanders in her sleep. The family is terribly concerned. They fear an inherited weakness. Inherited weakness. And the dread phrase that hints at Victorian anxieties about degeneration. Many worry that sleeplessness reflects broader biological decline within families and society itself. The rapid pace of modern life, some theorize, may not just exhaust individuals. It may damage future generations. You pass a bookstore advertising newly published treatises on hereditary nervous disorders, their authors solemnly warning of civilization's crumbling biological foundation. Insomnia becomes a metaphor for cultural decay. If even the best-bred ladies and gentlemen can't sleep, what hope is there for society's moral backbone? Of course, none of this means the Victorians lacked practical suggestions. Entire industries spring up offering advice on how to sleep like a proper Christian gentleman or virtuous lady. Booklets prescribe strict schedules: rise at dawn, exercise moderately, eat simple foods, avoid gossip, pray nightly, and never under any circumstances stimulate the mind with poetry after dinner. Some of these guides sound suspiciously like modern sleep hygiene tips. Others descend into the absurd. You glance at one pamphlet suggesting that insomniacs keep their hands outside the covers while sleeping to prevent excessive bodily stimulation. Draw your own conclusions on that one. The pressure weighs especially heavily on women. Physicians warn that intellectual women risk nervous collapse. Debates rage in medical journals about whether women's minds are simply too delicate for higher education. Studying thinking, even reading the wrong kinds of books, might overheat the female brain, disrupting sleep and destabilizing the family unit itself. You pause beside a well-dressed woman sitting rigidly in her parlor, staring into the flickering fireplace. She's been prescribed near total rest for her nervous prostration. For months now, she's been forbidden to read, write, or even hold prolonged conversations. Her husband monitors her activities carefully, all for the sake of restoring her sleep. Historians still argue whether these rest cures were compassionate attempts at mental health treatment, or simply thinly veiled social control designed to keep women passive. Once again, the answer floats somewhere in the gray fog between both. Outside, the city moves on bells, tolling carriages, rattling telegraph wires, humming. But inside these heavy-curtained homes, countless Victorian insomniacs lie trapped in their beds, staring into the dark, knowing full well that failure to sleep might not just ruin their health, but taint their very character. And yet, despite all their rigid routines, many still toss and turn. Which brings you to the next chapter of their desperate search for rest at the physical battleground of the bedroom itself. You step quietly into one of the grand Victorian townhouses, where the battle for sleep wages not only in the mind, but in the very architecture of the bedroom itself. If discipline of thought hasn't worked, perhaps control of environment will. Victorians turn their bedrooms into carefully engineered sanctuaries, designed to coax the nervous system into submission. As you enter, you notice immediately how little resembles the cozy, cluttered bedrooms of modern life. This space feels clinical. The drapes are impossibly thick layers of velvet, meant to block out every stray beam of gaslight or moon glow. Heavy shutters reinforce the windows, designed to insulate against the clatter of passing carriages or drunken midnight songs from the street. You run your fingers along the padded door, yes, padded, to muffle every creak and conversation outside. Even the floorboards have been reinforced to minimize sound and vibration. A single clock, carefully muted, sits under a glass dome to prevent its ticking from driving the sleepless insane. Noise, a doctor once warned in The Lancet, is the enemy of nerve rest. And these bedrooms reflect that paranoia. Historians still debate whether Victorian soundproofing actually worked or simply offered the illusion of control. But it's clear that for many, the mere effort brought a sense of calm. They were doing something, taking action. You glance toward the massive bed itself, the centerpiece of the room. It's not just any bed. Some models boast specially designed springs to minimize motion. Others tilt slightly to adjust circulation, a nod to theories that raising the head or feet might influence nervous relaxation. The mattresses are made of horsehair, carefully selected for firmness to discourage restless shifting. At the foot of the bed stands a curious contraption, a bed fan. These early mechanical devices promise to circulate air, evenly keeping the sleeper cool, or as Victorians like to phrase it, temperate. Stale air, they believed, could agitate fragile nerves. You pause, noticing the absence of books, paintings, or decorative clutter. For many insomniacs, even visual stimulation was suspect. Some guides recommend stripping bedrooms of all but the most calming items, muted colors, simple drapery, and perhaps a small vase of lavender to gently perfume the air. A physician's pamphlet you find on the nightstand lists ideal sleep conditions in exhaustive detail. Temperature cool but not cold, air fresh but not drafty, bedding firm but yielding, lighting minimal, stimulation none whatsoever. Victorians took seriously the belief that external conditions directly governed internal peace. Control the environment, control the mind. Of course, as you wander further, you stumble upon one of the oddest features of these engineered bedrooms on the sleep monitors. No, not Fitbit-style digital trackers, but hovering physicians, family members, or hired nurses whose job was to observe the insomniac's nighttime behavior. Imagine trying to fall asleep while someone sits nearby in a stiff wooden chair, scribbling notes every time you twitch. Strangely enough, this practice was intended to provide reassurance rather than anxiety proof that one's insomnia was being taken seriously. Historians still argue whether such constant observation soothed or exacerbated patients' anxieties. You can likely guess where you'd fall on that debate. For children, entire nurseries were designed as sleep laboratories. Cribs were fitted with special nets to prevent dangerous rolling. Some families installed early versions of white noise generators, wind-up mechanical fans, or small water features that provided a soft, constant hum. Victorian parenting manuals overflowed with strict schedules, warning mothers to avoid excessive rocking bright colors or excitable company in the evening. As you peek into a child's nursery, you see the nursemaid dimming oil lamps and gently closing thick velvet curtains, while whispering a lullaby with military precision. Sleep like everything else, was managed down to the minute. But even with these elaborate environmental controls, many still struggled. The anxiety about not sleeping often outweighed the benefits of any physical adjustment. The more one tried to force sleep, the more elusive it became. You pass a gentleman anxiously pacing his drawing room in slippers, glancing nervously at the clock. His perfectly silent, perfectly dark bedroom waits upstairs, but he cannot bear to enter it yet. The pressure is too great. The fear of failure of lying awake for hours haunts him more than the sleeplessness itself. Sleep for Victorians has become a moral performance staged nightly in these carefully curated rooms. And many begin to wonder if environment isn't enough. Perhaps they need stronger tools, gadgets, contraptions, and devices that promise to conquer their rebellious brains. And soon you'll see just how bizarre and surprisingly inventive those tools would become. You ease into the next Victorian home and instantly feel like you've wandered into some strange prototype of a modern wellness gadget expo. Because if moral fortitude and padded doors haven't delivered sweet slumber, there's always technology. Or at least what Victorians thought technology should look like. The first device you encounter looks deceptively like an ordinary bed until you notice the lever at its base. This is a rocking bed, designed to gently sway the sleeper back and forth, mimicking the motions that calm infants. The theory, gentle movement might coax overstimulated adults into a tranquil, almost hypnotic slumber. You watch as a maid cranks the mechanism, the bed gliding in slow, deliberate arcs. The wealthy lady lying atop it closes her eyes hopefully, while a physician observes nearby, noting whether the mechanical rocking regulates her breath. Historians still argue whether these beds offered real benefit or simply distracted patients long enough to trigger sleep through monotony. Either way, hundreds were sold to desperate insomniacs willing to try anything. You move deeper into the household and discover even stranger contraptions. In one corner, a vibrating chair hums softly. Its wooden frame rattles under the patient's weight, aiming to jostle the nerves into balance. Some designs use hand-cranked gears. Others employ small steam-powered engines. Yes, steam-powered furniture, a wonderfully Victorian solution, if there ever was one. The theory popular among certain physicians is that controlled vibration might soothe frayed nerves, improve circulation, and reset the overstimulated brain. Whether it worked or simply served as an elaborate placebo is still debated, but it certainly wasn't for lack of effort. You even spot a pulsation helmet, essentially a leather cap with adjustable air pockets that gently squeeze the scalp in rhythmic pulses. Supposedly, this promotes cerebral blood flow regulation, calming the busy mind. You'd be forgiven for mistaking it for something out of a steampunk costume party, as you watch a gentleman have his scalp compressed by this bizarre headgear. You can't help but wonder how many hats were ruined in the name of science. Of course, Victorians being Victorians, they didn't stop at passive contraptions. Some sleep devices sought to impose discipline on wandering minds directly. Enter the monotony machine's devices designed to create repetitive soothing noises or movements. One such invention involves a rotating wheel that emits a gentle clicking sound, somewhat like a metronome. The patient is instructed to match their breathing to the clicks, slowing their heart rate and hopefully lulling themselves into rest. Early sleep therapists promoted these tools as mental pacifiers. Historians have since debated whether these rhythm machines mark the origins of modern sleep meditation devices or whether they were simply Victorian cleverness applied to an unsolvable problem. Either way, you hear echoes of this same idea in today's sleep apps, playing ocean waves and rain sounds. Another curious invention you stumble upon resembles a cross between a hammock and a straitjacket, a body sling suspended from ceiling hooks. The patient lies partially elevated limbs, gently supported in hopes of reducing muscular tension and calming the nervous system. It's equal parts sleep aid and unsettling circus act. You watch a servant carefully assist a lady into the sling, her body swaying gently as her physician assures her husband that the removal of gravity burdens may ease her anxious breathing. The husband nods solemnly, clearly desperate for any solution. Some inventors even dabbled in early versions of weighted blankets. Heavy quilts filled with sand or lead beads were laid across the chest, applying calming pressure believed to soothe hyperactive nerves. Oddly enough, modern science would later rediscover the same principle with less questionable materials. The deeper you venture, the more elaborate and desperate these mechanical interventions become. Head coolers which circulated chilled water around the scalp were popular among those who believed overheating the brain caused insomnia. Meanwhile, heated foot baths in the bedroom aimed to draw blood away from the head and promote relaxation. Every organ had its proposed remedy. Some physicians even prescribed breathing tubes, long rubber hoses through which the patient inhaled purified, cooled air while lying in bed. The goal: deliver oxygen at just the right temperature and moisture to soothe inflamed lungs and, by extension, calm the nerves. Yet despite these contraptions, few patients found long-term relief. The anxiety about sleep itself often undermined even the most meticulously engineered bedroom. The more one tried to force slumber through gadgets, the more elusive rest became. You observe one gentleman draped in wires and tubes lying rigidly, while a nurse times his breath and adjusts a crank nearby. He opens one eye and mutters with a faint smile, "Perhaps I should simply stay awake." Still, as absurd as some of these devices seem, you realize they're all united by one thing, the desperate hope that something might finally tame the Victorian brain's endless chatter. And when the gadgets failed, as they often did, many turned to the next solution: bottled promises of sleep sold from behind marble counters carried in velvet-lined satchels and whispered about with both hope and dread. Patent medicines. You drift now into the hazy, perfumed world of Victorian pharmacies, where the quest for sleep becomes not mechanical, but chemical. If padded rooms and vibrating chairs failed, surely a little something in a bottle might finally silence the racing mind. Behind a polished oak counter, a pharmacist arranges his wares like a magician preparing his potions. Dozens of amber and cobalt glass bottles glisten in the gaslight. Each promises relief: Dr. Bennett's restful elixir bromide of potassium chlorodyne syrup, Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup. The names alone sound like lullabies. Victorians, forever drawn to scientific-sounding solutions, embrace these patent medicines with enthusiasm and sometimes reckless abandon. You watch as a weary gentleman leans on the counter, rubbing his temples. 2 nights now, no sleep. "My nerves, sir, are beyond repair." The pharmacist nods gravely, offering a small bottle. A spoonful at bedtime, guaranteed to quiet the nerves. The label boasts a proprietary blend of herbs, and though not advertised so loudly, generous doses of opium and chloroform. Yes, chloroform, the same substance surgeons use to knock patients out cold for amputations. Historians still debate whether these medicines were acts of cruel exploitation or simply the desperate result of limited medical understanding. But one thing is certain: they worked, at least temporarily. You examine one bottle labeled Godfrey's Cordial, widely used not only for adult insomnia, but also to soothe teething infants. Its active ingredient, opium. Mothers dose their children nightly, trusting the pharmacist's promise that it calms the nerves and encourages peaceful slumber. The unintended consequences, however, begin to pile up. Dependency creeps in like ivy up the walls of these grand homes. Patients return day after day for stronger doses, needing just a bit more to reach the promised tranquility. You see it in the sunken eyes of the pharmacist's regulars: businessmen slumped on benches, widows clutching empty vials, anxious mothers whispering for refills. Some medicines combine multiple sedatives into potent cocktails. Chlorodyne, perhaps the most notorious, blends chloroform, cannabis extract, and morphine into one syrupy dose. A few spoonfuls can drop even the most frantic mind into oblivion, though it often leaves the body dangerously depressed. Breathing shallow skin, pale. A pale woman enters next, her voice brittle. Doctor says I may increase my dose. Yes, the pharmacist hesitates briefly before nodding. He's seen this before. Even respected physicians prescribe these substances freely. The science of addiction is still poorly understood, and for many the short-term benefits outweigh distant warnings. After all, the fear of sleepless nights remains stronger than the fear of dependency, at least for now. You glance at a newspaper headline pinned near the counter. Opium and the modern woman, a growing concern among London's doctors. Public debate is beginning to stir, though solutions remain elusive. Meanwhile, not all remedies are so overtly chemical. You notice a shelf of herbal tonics, valerian, passion flower, chamomile, promoted as gentler alternatives for the more cautious insomniac. They appeal especially to the morally anxious middle class, eager to preserve virtue while chasing sleep. Historians still argue whether these botanical treatments were truly effective or simply comforting rituals. But compared to the escalating risks of laudanum and chlorodyne, their harmlessness may have been their greatest virtue. Some patients, fearing addiction but desperate for relief, turn to alcohol-based tonics, which conveniently blur the lines between medicine and recreational drinking. Brandy-laced sleeping drafts become household staples taken discreetly after dinner or before bed. You step into a private sitting room where a gentleman sips his nightly port generously laced with laudanum. His wife watches nervously but says nothing. The ritual is so common now that even polite society averts its gaze from the growing undercurrent of chemical dependence. By now you realize Victorian insomniacs aren't simply battling sleeplessness. They're locked in a tug-of-war between self-control and surrender. Each new bottle offers hope, but tightens the invisible chains of reliance. You pause outside yet another pharmacy, where a young apprentice arranges a display for Dr. Pierce's favorite prescription, marketed especially to women suffering from female nervous conditions. Its secret high doses of alcohol flavored and sweetened into submission. Inside these shimmering bottles lies the essence of Victorian insomnia, fear wrapped in science, hope laced with poison. As the debate over patent medicines begins to stir in medical circles, some doctors start searching for alternatives treatments that might address the mind itself, not just drown it into silence. Soon you'll witness their next bold experiment, taming insomnia by hypnotizing the restless Victorian brain. You step out of the heavy drug-scented air of the pharmacy and into a quieter, darker corner of Victorian medicine. Here, where sleep remains elusive, despite padded doors, rocking beds, and potent syrups, physicians turn to something far stranger, the power of the mind itself. Tonight, you find yourself in a small, candlelit consultation room, where a patient lies rigid on a fainting couch, eyes half-lidded, breathing shallow. At his side stands the doctor, not with pills or syringes, but with a metronome and a steady, low voice. Your eyelids are heavy. You feel deeply relaxed. Sleep comes easily now. Welcome to the world of hypnosis, or as Victorians often still called it, mesmerism. The belief that the mind could be coaxed into sleep through suggestion wasn't entirely new. Franz Mesmer's 18th century theories of animal magnetism had long circulated through Europe, proposing invisible forces flowing through the body that could be manipulated to heal and induce rest. Though Mesmer himself had fallen into scientific disrepute, his ideas lingered. By the late 19th century, Victorian physicians were reviving these notions, stripping away some of the mystical trappings and rebranding mesmerism as hypnotic therapy for everything from chronic pain to nervous exhaustion to naturally insomnia. Historians still argue whether these experiments represented genuine early psychology or simply theatrical quackery. But regardless of scientific rigor, the patients came. Desperately, you observe as the doctor slowly waves his hand in rhythmic passes over the patient's face, his voice soft and repetitive. The flickering candlelight plays against the pale features of the insomniac. The entire scene feels half science, half seance. The goal: bypass the conscious mind still trapped in its racing thoughts, and access the body's natural sleep instinct through trance-like relaxation. And remarkably, some patients did seem to respond. Studies reported reduced anxiety, calmer breathing, and in certain cases, the long-sought return of natural sleep patterns, at least temporarily. You peer into medical journals scattered on a side table. One article praises hypnotism as a balm to overwrought nerves, while another warns of charlatans exploiting the desperate. The debate rages. Is this a breakthrough in nervous therapy, or just the latest illusion for insomniacs grasping at hope? Of course, not all practitioners were medical professionals. Hypnotic demonstrations became popular stage shows where performers mesmerized volunteers before gasping audiences, commanding them to sleep or perform absurd tricks. Public fascination blurred the lines between entertainment and medicine, fueling both hope and skepticism. In wealthier homes, some families even hired private hypnotic consultants, often self-trained, who promised personalized sleep induction sessions. You watch one such figure quietly coach a lady through deep breathing and rhythmic counting his tone as soft as the ticking clock beside him. Historians still debate whether these private sessions genuinely helped or merely replaced one ritual with another, distracting patients from their anxieties long enough for exhaustion to do its work. The more respectable medical hypnotists, however, sought to distance themselves from the parlor trick variety. They published papers, conducted clinical observations, and argued that hypnotic therapy engaged the autonomic nervous system, though their language for it was still evolving. For Victorian insomniacs, this offered something deeply appealing, a treatment that didn't rely on drugs machines or being scolded for moral weakness. Instead, hypnosis suggested that their minds could be gently retrained to embrace rest rather than beaten into submission with sedatives. Of course, even here, anxiety found a way to seep in. Some patients feared becoming too suggestible, losing control, or being manipulated while in a hypnotic state. Stories circulated of unscrupulous hypnotists implanting dangerous ideas or stealing from patients mid-trance. You pause outside a fashionable salon, advertising private hypnotic consultations. The bold lettering promises sleep without drugs, master the mind. But below in small print, another note warns ladies must be accompanied by a family member. Even in sleep, Victorian gender anxieties never fully rest. In some elite circles, hypnotism evolved into more than just treatment. It became a kind of social status marker, proof of one's willingness to embrace cutting-edge science. Dinner parties buzzed with stories of the latest hypnotic successes, and fashionable magazines published interviews with sleep scientists promoting their methods. You overhear one dinner guest remark, "Dr. Pritchard put me under in only 3 minutes last Tuesday, most restorative." But for every success story, many still lie awake after their session's disappointment, thick as the London fog. For all its theatrical appeal, hypnotism, like so many Victorian remedies, often struggled to conquer the true beast, the fear of sleeplessness itself. And so, even as these softly whispered therapies offered some hope, many patients continued to search for newer, better methods to master their anxious bodies. Tomorrow you'll join them as they turn to their stomachs, convinced that digestion, not the brain, holds the true key to sleep. The morning air carries a faint aroma of toast and weak tea as you wander into the next frontier of Victorian sleep obsession, the dining room. Because if gadgets, drugs, and hypnosis haven't worked, perhaps what you eat, or more importantly, what you don't eat, might finally unlock restful slumber. Victorians begin to view digestion as the secret governor of sleep. After all, the stomach and nerves are intimately connected, or so the medical pamphlets argue. Overburden your belly, and your brain will toss and turn all night in sympathy. You slip into a breakfast parlor where a physician consults with a pale gentleman poking nervously at his dry toast. No red meat after noon, the doctor advises. Light broths, perhaps a boiled egg in the evening. And no wine before bed, only warm milk. Historians still debate whether these early sleep diets were rooted in genuine observation or Victorian obsession with bodily purity. Either way, they reflect the era's growing fixation on internal hygiene. The theory is simple. Stimulate the stomach, you stimulate the nerves. Heavy digestion keeps the nervous system engaged when it should be resting. Thus, the ultimate cure for insomnia might be found not in the bedroom, but on the dinner plate. Some doctors promote extreme regimens. You find pamphlets warning against stimulating condiments like pepper mustard or even vinegar. Spicy foods might inflame the nerves just as surely as a late-night novel or an emotional argument. More radical sleep diets recommend lengthy periods of near fasting. One must eat like a monk to sleep like a child. One fashionable physician proclaims in an article you skim on a patient's side table. Yet while many Victorians pursue restraint, others embrace bizarre specialty diets designed to recalibrate the entire body. Some patients follow fruitarian sleep cures, consuming only raw fruits and nuts, convinced that their simplicity will calm inner turmoil. Others swear by milk-only diets, drinking quarts daily to coat the stomach and pacify the nerves. You sit beside a gentleman, carefully measuring his nightly milk draft into a heavy ceramic cup. The body prefers blandness, he murmurs, eyes fixed on the liquid, like it holds salvation. And of course, there's Dr. Salisbury's meat cure, which promotes an all-beef regimen. Salisbury stakes, yes, that Salisbury are served in steady, unseasoned portions to fortify the nervous system and supposedly balance the humors. Whether this induces sleep or simply monotony is still debated, but his devoted followers swear by the results. The Victorian love of regimens knows no bounds. You spot charts prescribing exact dinner hours, food pairings, portion sizes, and even recommended mastication counts. Yes, some sleep guides prescribe chewing each bite exactly 32 times to aid digestion and calm nervous excitement. You peek into a fashionable ladies' tea room where sugar is quietly swapped for honey and caffeine-free herbal infusions replace scandalous black tea. The hostess whispers proudly, "My sleep has improved since I abandoned stimulants entirely." Yet even in this world of dietary discipline, contradictions abound. Many physicians prescribe small evening snacks, nightcaps of bread and warm milk, believing mild satiety prevents nighttime wakefulness caused by hunger pangs. Others insist complete fasting after sundown to avoid gastric strain. Historians still argue whether any of these regimens offered meaningful help or merely served as elaborate rituals that soothed anxious minds through the illusion of control. Victorians even apply their digestive theories to timing and posture. After dinner, walks neither too brisk nor too casual are prescribed to aid digestion. Some advocate propping the head slightly during sleep to ease reflux and thus prevent midnight awakenings. You watch one particularly devout patient arranging his pillows at a carefully calculated 30-degree angle, muttering about esophageal tranquility. It's a precise ballet of self-management. In wealthier households, entire kitchen staff routines are adjusted to accommodate their master's sleep regimen. Chefs learn to prepare milky porridges, stewed apples, and lightly poached fish with scientific precision, while butlers time evening servings to within minutes of doctor's orders. And still for many, sleep remains stubbornly elusive. They chew their bland toast, sip their warm milk, and lie awake nonetheless, their anxiety merely redirected from moral failure to dietary miscalculation. You walk once more past a physician's waiting room, where patients clutch food diaries alongside their symptom logs. One woman whispers to another, "Perhaps it was the orange at lunch, or the spice in the soup." And so the hunt continues, each meal dissected, each snack scrutinized in hopes of finally outwitting the cruel thief of sleep. Yet, even as digestion becomes the battlefield, some Victorians begin exploring a far more electrifying solution, quite literally. Tomorrow you'll step into their experiments with electric sleep, where currents buzz, wires hum, and anxious minds dare to tame their own brains with the new power of science. You step carefully into a small chamber that hums faintly, its walls lined with polished brass instruments, leather chairs wired like scientific thrones, and coiled cables running like serpents across the floor. Welcome to the most shocking chapter in the Victorian quest for sleep electric therapy. The 19th century, after all, belongs to electricity. It is the mysterious, invisible force, promising to revolutionize everything, lighting homes, powering machines, transmitting messages across oceans. And now, inevitably, it is being harnessed to conquer insomnia. You watch as a nervous patient lowers himself into a reclining chair fitted with metal headbands and chest plates. A physician adjusts dials on a nearby control box, sending a soft current through the man's temples. The patient stiffens momentarily, then relaxes, his eyes fluttering. This will quiet the cerebral agitation, the doctor assures him. Voice calm, hands steady. Historians still debate whether these early experiments in electrotherapeutics were based on scientific insight or over-enthusiastic guesswork. But Victorians saw in electricity a kind of modern magic, a tool that might soothe overstimulated nerves without the moral compromises of opiates or alcohol. Many doctors believed that insomnia stemmed from either overcharged nerves or nervous exhaustion. Depending on the theory, mild electric currents could either stimulate or sedate the system. Some patients received gentle pulsations to reawaken dormant nerve fibers. Others were bathed in low-frequency currents to calm hyperactive brain centers. You study the electro-sleep devices lining the physician's shelves. Headbands wired to deliver tiny pulsing shocks to the forehead. Induction coils creating oscillating currents that massage the brain. Galvanic helmets, bizarre metal contraptions resembling medieval armor, designed to flood the entire skull with a steady electrical field. The patients, wide-eyed, at first slowly submit to the buzzing therapies, seduced by the promise of modern science. Some even report success. Gentle electric treatments occasionally induce muscle relaxation, slower breathing, and that blissful tipping point into drowsiness. But whether the effect comes from the current itself or the soothing ritual surrounding it remains a point of contention. One gentleman, just finishing his session, smiles faintly. "I felt my thoughts dissolve into nothing like mist," he whispers. "It was peaceful." Of course, not all experiments were so gentle. You peek into a private clinic where more aggressive treatments unfold, high-voltage applications designed to jolt severe insomniacs into submission. Patients clench their fists as stronger currents course through their bodies, nerves twitching involuntarily. Some emerge glassy-eyed, dazed, but reporting temporary relief. You cringe slightly watching one of these sessions. The border between cure and torment feels thin here. Outside the clinic, you find advertisements boasting miraculous results. Conquer sleeplessness, the balm of electrical sleep. Harmless, restorative, scientific, but not everyone shares the enthusiasm. Critics warn of nerve damage, burns, and emotional destabilization. Some doctors suggest that indiscriminate electrification may worsen nervous exhaustion rather than cure it. Historians still argue whether these concerns reflected genuine risks or simply professional jealousy toward the booming electrotherapy craze. Like much of Victorian medicine, ambition often raced ahead of caution. Even domestic versions of these devices flood the market. Enterprising companies produce home electro-sleep kits for middle-class families desperate to self-treat. You inspect one such box, a polished wooden case housing wires, batteries, and a detailed instruction booklet promising safe application for ladies and gentlemen of delicate nerves. One household invites you in as the lady of the house demonstrates her nightly ritual. She dons a modest electric forehead strap while reclining in bed, her husband gently activating the current with a hand crank beside her. 15 minutes before sleep, she explains cheerfully, and my mind quiets like a resting pond. You can't help but admire their optimism and their complete faith in Victorian gadgetry. As electricity becomes increasingly fashionable, some theorists grow more ambitious. A few fringe physicians even propose that direct brain stimulation could reset sleep-wake cycles, entirely controlling insomnia at its neurological roots. You pass by one speculative lecture hall, where a professor displays diagrams of brain regions tied to sleep, proposing future machines that might precisely target these centers with calculated pulses. The language sounds eerily close to what modern science would one day explore with brainwave research and transcranial stimulation, though the Victorians wield little more than educated guesses. Still, even these early experiments reveal a growing shift. Insomnia is no longer purely a moral or digestive failing. It's increasingly seen as a neurological disorder, a problem of faulty wiring rather than weak will. This tiny conceptual leap will eventually reshape the entire field of sleep medicine. For now, however many patients remain caught between hopeful currents and lingering doubts. As you listen to the gentle buzzing and watch the wires pulse faintly, you wonder how much comfort they find in the hum of science, and how much they fear what they don't yet understand. Tomorrow, you'll leave the clinics and laboratories behind to witness a new breed of sleep evangelists, charismatic figures who promise not medicine, but mindset as the ultimate cure for insomnia. You leave the hum of buzzing wires behind and step into an entirely different kind of treatment hall. One that trades machines for mantras, chemicals for conviction. Tonight, you join the growing crowds, flocking to Victorian sleep evangelists, the self-proclaimed gurus, who promise not just rest, but total mastery of one's restless mind. You ease into a stiff wooden seat as the gas lamps hiss overhead. The air hums with nervous anticipation as anxious men and women gather clutching not prescriptions, but notepads. On stage, a well-dressed gentleman steps forward, hands clasped confidently behind his back. "My friends," he announces, "your insomnia is not a curse. It is a choice." A quiet ripple moves through the audience. This isn't a doctor speaking. This is one of the many self-help lecturers filling Victorian lecture halls, preaching personal responsibility and mental discipline as the path to peaceful slumber. Unlike the medical hypnotists you've seen before, these sleep evangelists blend philosophy, pseudoscience, Christian morality, and sheer confidence into a potent mix. They promise that with the proper mindset, with enough discipline, anyone can overcome insomnia without machines or medication. You scribble notes alongside the audience as the speaker rattles off his rules for sleep mastery. Purify your thoughts before bed. Eliminate fear of sleeplessness itself. Reject stimulants and drugs. Maintain unwavering faith in your body's natural rhythms. Above all, avoid effortful sleeping. Sleep, he insists, cannot be forced, only allowed. Historians still debate whether these lectures offered real psychological benefit or simply shamed desperate patients into blaming themselves further. Either way, they struck a chord with Victorians desperate for control. One woman beside you whispers, "If I could only stop fearing the night I know I'd sleep." This growing mental hygiene movement echoes broader Victorian anxieties about self-control. Sleep becomes a metaphor for mastery over one's impulses. If your thoughts misbehave, it's your duty to correct them. Weak nerves aren't the fault of the world, they're personal failings to be conquered through willpower. Some lecturers promote visualization techniques, encouraging audiences to picture peaceful gardens or drifting clouds. Others recommend rigid thought exercises, reciting calming phrases, counting backward from 1000 R, or mentally composing alphabetic lists of flowers, animals, or virtues. You listen as tonight's speaker leads the group in a guided mental drill. Picture your body growing heavier, limb by limb. Imagine your breath as gentle waves lapping at the shore. The hall grows eerily quiet. For a moment, even you feel your pulse slow. Yet for many, these methods become double-edged swords. The more one tries to suppress anxious thoughts, the more elusive sleep becomes. The fear of not sleeping spirals into its own kind of insomnia, a cruel cycle that modern psychologists would one day name sleep performance anxiety. You pass a corner bookstall outside the lecture hall. The shelves overflow with guides, Mastering the Art of Repose, Victory over the Nervous Mind, the Christian Sleeper's Manual. Each promises simple steps to defeat restlessness through sheer mental discipline. For wealthier patients, private tutors offer sleep coaching sessions, one-on-one training in thought control breathing, and relaxation rituals. You glimpse one such consultation through a townhouse window, a young woman practicing nightly affirmations while her coach nods approvingly. Some gurus even begin blending Eastern philosophies into their sleep programs. You spot pamphlets introducing London readers to ancient breathing techniques, light yoga poses, and meditative prayer borrowed loosely and often inaccurately from Hindu and Buddhist traditions. Historians still argue whether these early appropriations reflected genuine curiosity or were simply exoticized fads for fashionable insomniacs. But they mark a growing Victorian interest in non-Western paths to inner calm. Of course, these evangelists aren't without their critics. Established physicians accuse them of peddling false hope. Church leaders worry that too much self-focus borders on vanity or heresy. And skeptics point out that most of these self-help gurus sleep quite well after collecting lecture fees. You overhear one tired gentleman mutter on his way out, "If discipline alone worked, I'd be the best rested man in London." And yet, many continue returning week after week, clinging to the promise that tonight, maybe tonight, they'll finally master their wandering minds. You can't help but see in these gatherings an early echo of modern sleep therapy, cognitive behavioral techniques, mindfulness meditation. The Victorians stumbled toward insights that would one day anchor entire fields of psychology, even if their understanding remains incomplete. As the lecture ends, you follow the crowd out into the foggy streets, their faces a mixture of hope, skepticism, and exhaustion. Above you, the gas lamps flicker like tiny insomnia suns, watching silently as yet another night of restless tossing awaits many of these good citizens. Tomorrow you'll slip into one of the fiercest debates of all, whether men or women suffer more from this peculiar affliction, and why Victorian doctors can't seem to agree. The gaslight glows pale against the damp evening fog as you drift deeper into the most heated Victorian debate. Yet who suffers more from insomnia, men or women? You quickly discover that behind this seemingly simple question lies a tangle of gender politics, pseudoscience, and cultural anxiety that could keep anyone up at night. You slip into a physician's waiting room, where well-dressed ladies sit with stiff postures, eyes heavy with fatigue, their husbands pacing nearby, reading pamphlets and muttering about fragile constitutions. For many Victorian doctors, the answer is simple: women, of course. Their nerves are believed to be naturally weaker, their minds more sensitive, their emotions more volatile. Sleep, like everything else, is framed through rigid gender roles. One physician lectures to a group of young medical students. The female brain is easily overstimulated by intellectual strain, emotional upheaval, or improper social excitement. Thus, insomnia is sadly common in the fairer sex. You watch as the students nod in solemn agreement, scribbling notes they'll one day repeat in consulting rooms of their own. Historians still argue whether these sweeping diagnoses reflected real patterns or were simply projections of male anxieties onto women's bodies. The truth is likely messy as usual. Women in Victorian England faced unique sleep-disrupting pressures. Social isolation under strict propriety codes, endless domestic labor for working-class women, childbirth, nursing, and hormonal fluctuations, little control over their own medical care. Yet, at the same time, upper-class women were frequently discouraged from meaningful mental stimulation. Excessive reading education or public engagement were often blamed for fraying their nerves, creating the absurd catch-22 of being both overstimulated and understimulated all at once. You pass a fashionable townhouse where a young woman reclines in enforced bed rest, the infamous rest cure. Her doctor forbids reading, writing, or even conversation, convinced that any stimulation risks further exhausting her delicate nervous system. For many women, insomnia becomes entangled with diagnoses of hysteria, neurasthenia, uterine derangement, and other gendered catch-all terms. Doctors debate whether the root cause lies in the uterus, the ovaries, or simply female temperament. One respected physician asserts confidently, "The womb exerts a profound influence upon the female nervous state. Its imbalances frequently disturb restful slumber. You resist the urge to roll your eyes, though many women had no such luxury. Instead, they submitted to an endless parade of tonics, bed rest, warm baths, and moral guidance, all in the name of restoring their lost repose. And yet, across town you find equally exhausted men, bankers, lawyers, merchants, pacing their studies sleepless from the burdens of commerce, empire, and public life. For them, insomnia signals not hysteria, but overwork, ambition, and responsibility. One physician explains to a worried husband, "Your sleeplessness, sir, is the natural price of your industrious mind. Your duties weigh heavily, but your constitution remains strong." Thus, for men, insomnia often becomes almost noble a symptom of their active participation in modern life. While women's sleeplessness is medicalized as weakness, men's is framed as the tax of civilization's progress. Historians still debate whether this gendered framing reflects deeper power structures or simply Victorian attempts to explain growing epidemics of exhaustion on both sides of the social divide. Likely both. You spot pamphlets on a bookseller's stand. Sleepless Daughters, The Curse of Feminine Frailty, the nervous businessman triumph over the strain of industry. The contrast couldn't be clearer. Interestingly, some female physicians, a rare but growing force, begin pushing back. Figures like Dr. Mary Putnam Jacoby argue that women's insomnia isn't caused by mysterious uterine forces, but by the same pressures faced by men: social stress, physical exhaustion, intellectual suppression, and lack of agency. You pause by a lecture hall where a small gathering of progressive doctors debate these new ideas, questioning whether gender differences in sleep are truly biological or largely imposed by cultural roles. Their voices remain on the margins, but they are growing louder. Meanwhile, the working class faces its own insomnia crisis, largely ignored by elite debates. Factory women and domestic servants endure long shifts, irregular hours, and cramped living quarters conditions that make quality sleep nearly impossible, regardless of gender. You peek into a boarding house where a seamstress curls into bed beside her 2 children, already rising before dawn after a short, restless night. For her, insomnia isn't a fashionable disorder, it's simply part of survival. The farther you walk, the clearer it becomes. While Victorians obsess over who suffers more from sleeplessness, nearly everyone is suffering. And behind every argument lies the same gnawing fear: modern life itself may be incompatible with rest. As one overworked clerk mutters while you pass, "Perhaps it's not man or woman. Perhaps we've all outpaced ourselves." Tomorrow you'll trace how this collective insomnia across gender, class, and continent shapes the emerging global conversation on sleep that echoes far beyond the gaslit streets of Victorian London. The air grows heavier as you drift into the widening web of Victorian insomnia's global legacy, no longer confined to gaslit London parlors or medical lecture halls, but radiating outward as the world itself grows faster, louder, and more interconnected. You pause beside a newsstand where headlines from across the empire scream about trade booms, political tensions, and technological marvels. And woven beneath all of it, you recognize that familiar thread: exhaustion. Sleeplessness is no longer merely a local affliction. It has become a byproduct of global modernity. Historians still debate whether Victorian insomnia sparked a true worldwide epidemic or simply reflected anxieties tied to Western industrialization. But either way, you see its fingerprints everywhere. Steamships race across oceans, delivering not just goods, but ideas. Telegraph wires stitch continents together like nervous systems stretched too thin. Information that once took months now travels in days or hours. Colonies send back exotic teas, spices, opium, and tropical diseases. The pace of life accelerates everywhere, and so sleeplessness spreads. In New York, business magnates mirror their London counterparts, lying awake in gilded bedrooms atop Fifth Avenue as they contemplate stock fluctuations and trade negotiations. The American version of neurasthenia blooms with Dr. Beard's theories gaining transatlantic traction. The nervous American becomes both a diagnosis and a cultural archetype. Meanwhile, in Paris, Sleep clinics emerge blending hypnotism, electrotherapy, and diet regimens with fashionable flair. French physicians debate whether insomnia reflects the price of Parisian sophistication or the inevitable consequence of moral decadence. You overhear one Parisian physician announce, "Our brilliance stimulates our minds beyond nature's intent. The artist, the thinker, we sacrifice sleep for genius." In colonial outposts from India to South Africa, British officials write home about restless nights in the tropics, blaming the heat, the unfamiliar foods, the native noise, and the overwhelming administrative burdens of empire. You pause beside a tea merchant loading crates stamped for export. Ironically, the very stimulant flowing from British colonies to fuel global commerce also feeds the sleeplessness haunting its merchants and governors. Historians still argue whether colonial insomnia reflected environmental stress or psychological strain rooted in the moral contradictions of empire building. Likely both. Even non-Western societies begin absorbing fragments of Victorian sleep anxiety. Chinese medicine merchants sell hybrid remedies blending local herbs with imported Western tonics. Japanese physicians experiment with sleep cures that marry ancient philosophy with modern electrotherapy. The conversation grows increasingly global and increasingly confused. You walk through a medical exhibition where diagrams of the global nervous system are displayed, linking insomnia to everything from industrialization and urbanization to race climate and even moral evolution. Victorian science attempts to map sleep deprivation as though it were a disease of progress itself. Back in Britain, international conferences on sleep disorders begin attracting physicians eager to debate the nature of sleeplessness. Is it a failure of biology, of willpower, of civilization? No one agrees. But everyone agrees that insomnia now belongs to the modern condition. One pamphlet you pick up declares boldly, "No man of business, science, or state escapes the toll of nervous wakefulness." This is the affliction of our time. You glance around and realize just how deeply this notion has seeped into Victorian culture. Novels, essays, and plays feature insomniac characters symbolizing the fragile mind of progress. Poets romanticize sleepless musings as the fuel of creative brilliance. Advertisements promise cures ranging from electric helmets to exotic herbal teas, each more extravagant than the last. Even Queen Victoria herself was rumored to suffer occasional insomnia, feeding public fascination. After all, if the very monarch struggles to find rest, what hope is there for her subjects? Beneath all this, a quiet shift is occurring, one that will eventually shape the modern world's entire approach to sleep. The idea that insomnia may not be purely moral or spiritual, but medical, a condition rooted in the brain and body, worthy of scientific inquiry rather than shame. You overhear a younger physician argue with his older mentor. "It is not simply weak nerves, sir." "Then what is it?" "Perhaps a malfunction. A circuit gone wrong. The brain itself fails to power down." Here, in these flickering gaslit arguments, you hear the faint beginnings of modern sleep medicine, decades ahead of brain scans, melatonin studies, and cognitive behavioral therapy, but quietly inching toward a biological understanding. As you leave the crowded square, you glance up at the vast, star-strewn sky, at the one thing that hasn't sped up with modernity. And yet, even beneath its calm millions, now lie awake not from hunger or wolves at the door, but from the paradox of their own success. Tomorrow you'll step into the final, most haunting question of all. After everything, the drugs, devices, diets, and lectures, why does sleep still slip through human fingers? The streets are nearly empty now, as you wander through the final stretch of this strange, sleepless Victorian world. The lamps flicker, the fog drifts low, and inside thousands of carefully engineered bedrooms, restless minds still stir. You've seen the machines, the diets, the drugs, the lectures, the debates over gender morality, class, and empire. And yet one question still lingers in every gaslit chamber. Why does sleep remain so elusive? Victorian doctors, for all their confidence, slowly begin admitting a truth they rarely speak aloud in public. They don't fully understand sleep. Not really. Historians still debate whether this humble acknowledgement was the beginning of modern sleep science, or simply an uneasy surrender to nature's mystery. But here you feel it clearly. Behind their thick medical journals and complicated terminology lies a kind of helpless awe. Some call sleep a passive state, the body simply shutting down. Others insist it's an active process of the brain cleansing itself. The theories swirl and contradict. And insomnia. It remains maddeningly unpredictable. You sit briefly in a doctor's consulting room, watching him review case notes by lamplight. One patient finds relief with warm milk, another with hypnotism, another only after months of herbal teas. Some improve, some worsen. No pattern fully explains why. In a rare private conversation, the physician sighs. Perhaps the mind resists rest because it fears silence. That fear of silence, of losing control, of surrendering pulses through so many Victorian bedrooms. They live in a world that worships self-mastery, progress, and willpower, yet sleep demands the opposite, letting go. One gentleman you pass confesses softly to his physician, "I cannot stop thinking. I fear that if I stop, I may never wake." You realize that for many Victorians, sleeplessness isn't merely physical. It's existential, a nightly confrontation with vulnerability, mortality, and uncertainty. Some desperate patients even turn to early forms of talk therapy, pouring out their anxieties in private sessions. But without a true framework for understanding psychological insomnia, most doctors still prescribe tonics or rest cures instead. In wealthier circles, spiritual answers gain popularity. Some believe insomnia reflects divine testing. Others see it as punishment for moral failings. A few embrace Eastern philosophies, interpreting sleeplessness as a symptom of failing to release attachment to worldly concerns. One pamphlet titled, "Rest as Surrender: The Spiritual Path to Sleep," catches your eye at a street stall. It offers mantras for letting go of control remarkably similar to modern mindfulness practices, though deeply rooted in Victorian Christian language. For some patients, simply being told it's not your fault brings relief. The idea that sleeplessness might not be a moral weakness, but rather a complex interplay of body, mind, and circumstance, allows a few to finally release their nightly shame. You peek into one final bedroom where an elderly man lies quietly, eyes closed, breathing steady. No gadgets hum. No drugs dull his mind. No hypnotist whispers nearby. He simply breathes, and slowly sleep takes him. You wonder how much of his peace comes from acceptance, from releasing the struggle itself. Modern science would one day confirm much of what these Victorians groped toward, that insomnia often feeds itself through fear of insomnia, that letting go, not forcing sleep, is key, that rituals help not by curing the body, but by calming the mind, that sleep is deeply tied to emotional regulation and subconscious processing. But here, under the gaslit skies of 1890, such insights remain distant whispers. Instead, the Victorians lie in their padded, silent, perfectly darkened rooms, waiting for a peace they both crave and fear. You stroll one last time past rows of townhouses, where countless anxious eyes blink open in the darkness. Aristocrats, merchants, servants, all equal now in their nightly struggle. Even after years of brilliant medical theories, dazzling machines, endless tonics, and impassioned lectures, sleep remains the great equalizer, mysterious, simple, and endlessly complicated. Tomorrow, as the final chapter unfolds, you'll step gently into the quiet mystery that still haunts us all, the ancient, unsolved riddle of why sleep slips from human fingers despite every effort to grasp it. The streets grow completely still as you walk this last quiet mile through Victorian sleeplessness. The gas lights burn low, casting their soft amber pools onto damp cobblestones. Behind lace curtains and heavy velvet drapes, thousands of insomniacs lie awake, trapped between exhaustion and the stubborn refusal of their minds to yield. Even after everything you've seen, electric helmets, rocking beds, bitter tonics, strict diets, pulsing wires, whispered hypnotic commands, stern lectures, and padded bedrooms, the simple truth remains: sleep cannot be commanded. Victorian physicians and patients alike have tried to turn sleep into a puzzle to solve a machine to fix a behavior to discipline. Yet sleep has refused to fully cooperate. It remains maddeningly indifferent to human willpower. You slip inside a final lecture hall where one of the more honest physicians addresses a weary audience. We understand so much, yet not this. We know how to induce unconsciousness, but not true restorative slumber. We know how to drug the body, but not how to quiet the mind. Historians still argue whether this Victorian struggle reflects the birth pangs of modern sleep medicine, or simply the eternal mystery sleep has always been. But as you stand here, the weight of their frustration feels timeless. As technology accelerated, Victorians unwittingly trapped themselves. The faster life moved, the more they feared falling behind. The more they feared falling behind, the more their minds raced at night. And the more their minds raced, the more sleep slipped away. You peer into the room of a sleepless businessman sitting upright in bed at 3:00 a.m., mind spinning with investment deals and shipping routes. He checks the clock repeatedly, heart racing. In his mind, failure to sleep isn't simply fatigue, it's falling behind. You move to another home where a young mother paces while her infant finally sleeps. The demands of family propriety and suppressed ambition simmer inside her chest, preventing her own body from surrendering to rest. And in yet another home, a writer stares at the ceiling, overwhelmed by unfinished manuscripts, social obligations, and a gnawing sense that his best work may already be behind him. Sleep remains as ever a surrender, one that cannot be engineered, purchased, or entirely understood. It's the moment when control must be relinquished, and therein lies the terror for so many Victorians trained to control every other aspect of their lives. You finally reach one last modest home where an elderly woman sits calmly beside a window, watching the moon. She no longer fights the night. Some nights she sleeps, others she does not. And somehow both have become acceptable. In her quiet acceptance, you sense what the entire century of restless striving has missed, that sometimes the harder one tries to conquer sleep, the more it slips away. That rest may not be found in louder machines or stronger tonics or stricter rules, but in the soft yielding to imperfection itself. This, perhaps, is the most haunting and human lesson the Victorians leave us, that even with the full weight of science empire and invention behind them, sleep remained one of the last frontiers that refused to be fully colonized. And so you walk quietly away, the distant chiming of Big Ben carrying across the cool, silent air. Above the moon watches, as it always has, unmoved by humanity's cleverness and our endless struggle for control. Sleep continues to whisper its ancient mystery just out of reach. The city settles beneath a blanket of soft mist as you take your final steps. The lamps dim, the carriages quiet, and behind those tall brick townhouses, hearts finally slow. The heavy drapes fall across shuttered windows. The elaborate devices sit unused. The bitter tonics cool on nightstands. Even the most disciplined minds loosen their grip as breath deepens and bodies yield to something older than science. You feel the rhythm soften now, not forced, not conquered, but allowed. Like waves sliding onto shore. Like leaves drifting down through still autumn air. The questions still linger, yes. The Victorians never fully solved the riddle of sleep. Neither have we, and perhaps that's as it should be. Some mysteries, after all, are meant to remain gently unsolved, to humble us, to remind us. You let your shoulders release breath, steady eyes growing heavier as the hum of distant voices fades. The soft pulse of history drifts with you into rest. The machines are silent now. The mind's quiet. The moon watches and sleep, mysterious, forgiving, and timeless, finally arrives. Sweet dreams.